Urbanization. Child labor. In the area of labor reform, the most prominent issues included child labor and workers' compensation. In the later part of the 19th century, child labor became very common in the United States. As children provided a cheap and easily dominated workforce, by the ages of the 20th century, an estimated 4 million children aged 10 to 15 made up a substantial part of the nation's workforce. Progressives, or child savers, as they were often labeled, persisted and eventually secured some restrictions on child employment. The most famous law passed as a result of those effects, the Keating-Owen Act of 1916, did not last very long, but was nonetheless an important first step in protecting children.
Negative effects on urbanization, including housing, tenements, slums, etc. In the developing urban centers, scores of people crowded into tenement houses, sometimes several families to one or two small, overcrowded, and rodent-infested rooms. Many states passed housing regulations to help relieve crowded city slums. In some slums, progressive set-up centers called settlement houses. Reformers in slums residents met in them and worked to improve slum conditions. One famous settlement house was Hull House, founded in 1889 by Jane Addams and Alan Starr, two Chicago social workers.
Culturally, the Gilded Age was a period of notable literary and artistic achievement. Religion dominated the lives of many citizens. Revivals led by such evangelical preachers as Dwight L. Moody and J. Wilbur Chapman, 1859 through 1918, tapped into the deep convictions about the need for Christian faith, while also addressing the challenges of the so-called higher criticism of the Bible and Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. To meet ethical and human challenge of industrialism, liberal clergymen such as Walter Rauschenbusch and Washington Gladden proclaimed a social gospel that took Protestantism into society to achieve economic and social justice. Roman Catholics and Judaism experienced similar impulses to improve society. Gilded Age popular culture. Americans attended professional baseball games and watched as college football, first played in the late 1860s, grew in popularity. Dime novels recounted the western exploits of William Buffalo Bill Cody and the outlaw William Bonney. In growing cities, and the vaudeville stage offered a dazzling variety of comedy, songs, and novelty acts. Museums flourished in the major cities, and the symphony orchestras became the hallmark of culturally ambitious population centers. In many respects, the Gilded Age produced the conditions for mass entertainment that would reach maturity in the 20th century.
A political machine, also known as party machine, is a party organization that entices people to vote for a party. The political machine was a new type of urban politic organization characterized by certain common features that were very intertwined. First, machines were hierarchically organization. From one or a few people at the top, the machine spread like interweavy, with the representatives at every level of government, down to the presence of several thousand voters. The person at the top of the power structure was the boss, although the individual dimensions of the single boss varied from the machines to another. Second, the reason for the Did I start from here? From here.
Social Darwinism was the application of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, or survival of the fittest, to human society. Two types of social Darwinism emerged from 1870 to 1917, social Darwinism and reform Darwinism. Social Darwinism was the belief that people in society compete for survival. Reform Darwinism, created by Lester Frank Ward, was the belief that human beings can affect natural selection by being intelligent.
One big project during the late 1800s was the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. U.S. Congress passed the Pacific Railroad Act to authorize the building of a railroad across the continental United States. The Union Pacific Railroad, led by Thomas Durant, worked westward from Omaha, Nebraska, to meet the rails of the Central Pacific. led by California's Big Four, Leland Stanford, Colin P. Huntington, Mark Tompkins, and Charles Crocker, which had built eastward from Sacramento, California. The Transcontinental Railroad was completed on May 10, 1869, when crews of the Central Pacific and Union Pacific Railroad lines met and joined tracks at Promontory Summit, Utah.
Many poor Chicagans had no heat in the wintertime, no running water, and no neighborhood schools. Because the opportunity to bathe was rare for the poor, dirt sometimes accumulated on children until their skin resembled scales. These unsanitary conditions claimed a large toll, particularly among the young. The death toll was even higher in poor neighborhoods, where families might have 10 children in hope that 3 or 4 would reach adulthood. Adults also suffered from outbreaks of diseases, which included smallpox, cholera, scarlet fever, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and dysentery. In late 1894, hundreds of children were crippled by the effect of poor food. These streets were filthy, and the stinking privies and the foul rivers were perfect for breeding ground diseases. All the people in one blockhouse had to share 3 or 4 outside privies. Wealthy people would afford to be treated by doctors in their house. Poor people had to depend on charity hospitals. Hospitals were dirty, overcrowded, and nobody realized the importance of ventilation to get rid of deadly germs. The food and water was unsanitary. Poor people ate few nutrients.
We today have Miss Harrelson, a history teacher at Conley High School.
How do you think urbanization affected the lives of the common people?
I think urbanization greatly affected the lives of the common people because it really just completely changed the way people lived and worked. As factories started to develop, people moved to the cities to take those jobs. It started the development of tenement housing, and it then led eventually to, because of the unsatisfactory conditions in a lot of those factories, new laws for worker protection, and caused originally a lot of problems that the government had to step in and figure out how to solve to improve the lives of those new urban dwellers.
What is your point of view on political machines?
Political machines were very influential in the early 1900s, particularly tied to the idea of urbanization. The two dominant political parties at the time, the Republicans and the Democrats, used their political machines where the bosses really had a lot of influence over elections on all different levels, local all the way up through the national, which really involved how the country was dealing with the issues surrounding urbanization and the conditions of the factory workers.
What was the impact of the social Darwinism theory?
Just the answer?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Think about what the question was and remember.
Wait, stop.
Social Darwinism played an important role in how people viewed urbanization because of the theory that certain people were born with innate qualities that made them better than other people. It was a big argument for the big trusts and the large corporations that were being built at the time, and the extreme Social Darwinism was extremely impactful at the time because the belief of people being born with certain innate qualities that made them better than others was one of the arguments that supported the incredibly large unequal distribution of wealth